Defense News is proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, a storied U.S. commander speaks out about the end of the United States' mission in Afghanistan. And the Ike returns from a double pump deployment. Plus, the companies chosen by the Marine Corps to build its advanced reconnaissance vehicle prototypes. And what about the Army's plan for an electric ground vehicle? Jen Judson briefs us on that route. The VA and DoD is using artificial intelligence to help identify vets at risk for suicide. We meet with one colonel working on the project. It's the latest in news and analysis from the Pentagon to the platoon, here on Defense News Weekly. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Andrea Scott. There is a ton of news to get to this week, so let's dive in. First up, the aircraft carrier Dwight D. Eisenhower and its 4,600 sailors returned to Norfolk, Virginia this week after wrapping up a double pump deployment. The Eisenhower got underway for the deployment in the 5th and 6th Fleet's areas of operations in February 2021, after having just returned from a previous deployment in August 2020. Because of the Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group's contributions during this deployment, Acting Secretary of the Navy Thomas Harker has awarded the group the Navy Unit Commendation Medal. And East Coast Marines are now blasting away with the Corps' newest shoulder-fired rocket, the M3A1 Multi-Role Anti-Armor Anti-Personnel Weapon System, or MAWS. The reloadable recoilless rocket system is expected to supplement what's already in the arsenal and give infantry Marines a way to go after armor and just about anything else small arms can't take out. Fleet Marines will receive the MAWS by the end of 2023 and Reserve Marines by 2024. Earlier in July, President Joe Biden announced that the U.S.'s nearly 20-year mission in Afghanistan will end in August. After the September 11th attacks in 2001, now retired General Joseph Attell led Army Rangers into the country. He took charge of the mission there from 2016 to 2019 as the commander of the United States Central Command. Military Times' Howard Altman sat down with the general to hear his thoughts about the withdrawal.
The president at the time, George W. Bush, recently told a German publication that the decision to withdraw from Afghanistan was a mistake. Do you share that assessment? And if so, why or why not?
Well, the decision is the decision of the President of the United States, and it's well within his authority to do that. And whether it's a mistake or not, I think maybe history will make a determination of that. From my own perspective here, this is it's a difficult. I'm sure this is a very difficult decision for our president to make. My personal perspective is that I think we have national interests at stake in Afghanistan. Having influence in this part of the world, I think, is very, very important for us. And we certainly have, security concerns there. We've had a long-term partnership with the Afghan security forces, and I do think it was, one of the options available to us, as opposed to pulling all of our forces out, was to maintain a small presence on the ground where we could protect our counterterrorism interests and maintain our relationship more directly with the Afghan forces. We went through this in Iraq in 2011, and we chose to step away, and we found out what happened there. So I have a tendency to look at this through the lens of our experience in Iraq and our eventual return here just a couple of years after our departure.
Do you think that the over-the-horizon plan to support Afghan forces will work?
Well, I don't know if it is. I don't really know exactly what the plan is that is put together. What I would just share with you, Howard, is that over-the-horizon operations are challenging to conduct in any situation, and it's even more so in a place like Afghanistan. You don't have a lot of countries on the periphery. on the immediate periphery of Afghanistan that are willing to base and host U.S. or coalition forces, much less support operations into Afghanistan from it. So what it means is that we have to operate from a further distance, from perhaps from maritime platforms or bases in the Gulf, and that what that means is just getting to Afghanistan is a significant operation in and of itself, and then you have to actually do things on the ground. So it's certainly not impossible, but there are a lot of challenges that have to be overcome. And when you try to do what I think we might need to do at scale, that is support the Afghan forces in a variety of locations around the country of Afghanistan, which is a large country, then I think the challenge is even more exacerbated. So it's not impossible, but it's certainly not simple, and there are a variety of challenges to doing this.
Given the internal struggles in Afghanistan, internal political struggles and logistical issues, and people taking bribes, do you think that the Afghan National Security Forces can hold out against the Taliban, who have been making tremendous gains across the country?
Well, I recognize we've seen some reporting here recently that indicates we've seen forces going across the border into the Central Asian states, and we've seen attacks on Afghan special operations forces and things like that, and resulting casualties. I guess my assessment is that there are good and reliable Afghan forces, and there are those that are not as good and reliable. I believe the Afghan special operations capability, one that I'm very familiar with, I think they are good forces. I think they are generally very well led. Some of the Afghan corps will do the same. Some will not do as well because they're not as well led. But again, they are dependent upon logistical support and maintenance support and other things from the U.S. and coalition partners. And so when that goes away, then I do think there will be some diminishment of that. So, I think it's uneven. I think you'll see that some forces will fight well and honorably to defend themselves, and others will not do that. So I think it's going to be very much a mixed bag.
Was the U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan a success or a failure, and why?
President Trump's strategy, one that I operated under for the remnants of my time in service, was aimed at achieving a political reconciliation between the government of Afghanistan and the Taliban. And as a result of that, that would be a platform on which we could determine what our future relationship and presence was. We did not achieve that objective. We don't have political reconciliation. So I think from a strategic standpoint, we did not achieve that objective. And so that doesn't look like a win for us. That said, in my view, from my experience of 2001 through 2019, my observation of how the U.S. military performed there, our units on the ground, I think they did what was asked of them. While we had a variety of different strategies and approaches here that ultimately didn't lead to the strategic objective that we were looking for. That doesn't mean they did not operate honorably and fight as the American people would expect that they did. So, I think this may be another example where we had tactical victories on the ground, but they didn't add up to a strategic success that we were actually looking for.
Joe, as a commander, as a father, as a military man, what's your message to the folks who lost loved ones during this 20 years of conflict, and the many who, were wounded as a result of the service?
The sacrifices of those we lost and those that were wounded were noble sacrifices. They were made in good faith for a noble effort that we undertook in Afghanistan that has unfortunately not turned out strategically how we hoped that it would. But that does not diminish in any way the sacrifices that were made by those service members or their families. And would not want any of them to think that this was all done in vain. It was not. They served honorably and nobly at a time when our nation was calling for them to serve. And I think that's the most important thing that I would try to convey to them. I hope that that's the way that they feel.
Thanks, Howard. When we return, we hear about the Army's plan to move to electric ground vehicles.
The military and defense market is constantly evolving. Stay on top of the latest news with Sightline Media Group's live events. Continue to learn, understand new tools and technologies. We're live. You're on in 3. Defense, government, and industry leaders come together for successful and proven engaging events. You'll gain valuable insight, get the chance to ask questions, all from the comfort of your own home or office. Sign up for our events newsletters and receive alerts for upcoming live streams. The Army is moving to electric ground vehicles, but the transition isn't exactly without roadblocks. Covering every mile of the effort is Defense News ground combat reporter Jen Judson.
The Army is dipping a toe into the murky waters of fielding electric vehicles, and industry is chomping at the bit to make that happen. But it hasn't been easy for the commercial vehicle world to convince the hesitant service to commit to alternative power for its fleet. In 2019, the Army ramped up efforts to try to come up with a strategy to move its battlefield vehicles away from using classic fuels like JP-8, but has yet to fully realize a strategy. So the Army has continued to invite industry to bring working electric vehicles to demonstrations to show what's possible today and in the future. And the service held a demonstration in May at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where a large group of vendors brought vehicles that could be used for an electric light reconnaissance vehicle, which could be the Army's first foray in moving to fully electric vehicles. GM Defense brought its infantry squad vehicle that it had converted to a fully electric version in 12 weeks to that demonstration. And then it held an electrification summit at the beginning of June at its Milford Proving Grounds in Michigan, where service officials had the chance to drive both the ISV and the electric version for comparison on an off-road course. Defense News drove that same course with the same vehicles on the same day. Should the Army pursue the electric light reconnaissance vehicle, GM Defense plans to submit a design based on the Hummer EV chassis, which is yet to make its public debut. The Hummer EV features a 200 kilowatt-hour battery using Ultium technology and is a 1,000 horsepower vehicle. This all translates to about 90 minutes of drive time for 10 minutes of charging. Even as the technology advances in the commercial world, where GM is investing over $27 billion in electric and autonomous vehicles, the Army is still struggling to wrap its head around how to manage an all-electric fleet of vehicles with the logistic burdens on the battlefield that the commercial world simply doesn't face. So what are those obstacles? The operational environment for the Army is a major hurdle when considering electric vehicle performance, and the current vehicle platforms would not easily convert to all-electric. The Army believes converting current combat vehicles like the Abrams tank would be too costly, and technology is not there yet. Batteries that would be needed to power an Abrams tank are presently bigger than the tank. How the Army might refuel or recharge in an austere operational environment is a complicated matter, and the service is grappling with solutions. GM Defense offered some ideas where charging stations might not be possible, such as air-droppable batteries and highly mobile charging stations. Another concern is whether batteries can survive the beating the Army might put them through on the battlefield and the likely exposure to either very hot or very cold environments. So what's next? The Army hasn't totally warmed up to the idea of fully electric vehicles in the short term and believe hybrid might be a better approach. For GM Defense, a hybrid approach would be suboptimal and is an unnecessary bridge given where technology is and where it's going. The Army has invested about $75 million over the last 5 years on battery and electrification-related technology at the Ground Vehicle Systems Center alone, and is poised to spend $50 million in fiscal year 2022 on electric and mobility technology development. There is an effort to look at an electric version of the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle and also a hybrid electric Bradley infantry fighting vehicle, but there's still no funding for the electric light reconnaissance vehicle. The Army included the ELRV on a wish list of unfunded requirements that it sent to Congress following the release of the FY22 budget request, but it is unclear whether Congress will plus up the account to make it happen.
Thanks, Jen. For more of Jen Judson's coverage, visit defensenews.com. And now for defense industry headlines. The U.S. Marine Corps has chosen Textron Systems and General Dynamics Land Systems to begin contract negotiations to build advanced reconnaissance vehicle prototypes. That's according to a July 16th Marine Corps announcement. The service will also work with BAE Systems to study the possibility of adapting an amphibious combat vehicle to become an advanced reconnaissance vehicle, or ARV. Army Contracting Command Detroit Arsenal will award ARV other transaction authority contracts, which streamline the process for rapid prototyping if negotiations with Textron and GDLS are successful. GDLS, which is the manufacturer of the Light Armored Vehicle 25 currently in service, said it submitted an ARV prototype proposal by the Corps' May 3 deadline. Textron said at the time of the solicitation deadline that it would compete with a prototype dubbed Cottonmouth that it had already built and drove nearly 750 miles. President Joe Biden recently announced he would nominate Andrew Hunter, a well-known defense industry expert, to serve as the Air Force's next acquisition boss. Our own Air Force Times broke the news of Hunter's selection ahead of the White House's July 16th announcement. If confirmed by the Senate, Hunter would become Assistant Air Force Secretary for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics amid a major push to modernize the service's aircraft and weaponry. Hunter directs the Defense Industrial Initiative Group at the Center for Strategic and International Studies and is a senior fellow in the think tank's International Securities Program. A former Pentagon senior executive and Capitol Hill staffer, his work focuses on industrial-based policy, trade, and innovative technology. Long an outside observer of the Air Force procurement system, Hunter would soon oversee its hardware and software portfolio with more than $60 billion. Chief among those programs will be the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, the B-21 Raider bomber, the KC-46 Pegasus tanker, and multiple nuclear weapon initiatives. Pandemic-era budget constraints are expected to complicate efforts to execute a massive upcoming spending plan. You can read Rachel Cohen's extensive coverage on AirForceTimes.com. Satellite imagery company Planet Labs said the National Reconnaissance Office has extended and expanded its contract with the company's subsidiary Planet Federal for commercial satellite imagery. Under the contract, the U.S. intelligence and defense communities will continue to have access to Planet's unclassified daily 3 to 5 meter resolution imagery, while also gaining limited access to the company's video capabilities. The NRO first subscribed to Planet's imagery service in 2019, but financial details of the subscription are not public. Planet first began providing imagery to the intelligence community through a multi-year contract awarded by the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency in 2016. The NRO took over that arrangement in 2019 as part of the NGA's effort to transition responsibility for acquiring commercial satellite imagery for the intelligence community to the NRO. The announcement comes as the company prepares to go public this year through a special purpose acquisition company, a transaction it valued at $2.8 billion. Planet operates a fleet of about 200 satellites on orbit, capturing more than 3 million images daily of the Earth's surface. And that's it for this week's defense industry news. Stay with us though. When we return, personal finance expert Jeanette Mack will share tips on avoiding identity theft while traveling.
On this edition of Money Minute, Navy Federal Credit Union personal finance expert Jeanette Mack gives her latest tips.
It's easy to be carefree when you're on vacation. We all want to enjoy our well-deserved R&R. Remember, while you're taking some time off, fraudsters are working full-time to get at your identity and your money. So no matter where you are in the world, you've always got to keep your wits about you. Just like in the military, fraud and ID theft prevention comes down to training and preparation. Before you jet off to vacation paradise, tell your bank or credit union where you're going and for how long. That way they can authorize your purchases and track down fraud if your cards are being used somewhere else. And when you're using an ATM abroad or in the US, always check the reader for skimmers. It's a good habit. To prevent fraud online, don't do any of your banking on public Wi-Fi or use public devices. It's the best and easiest way for criminals to steal tourist personal information and money. And do not give your personal or account info to someone you don't know or trust. You probably wouldn't do it at home, so the same goes here too. Now you're ready to sit back, relax, and truly enjoy your time away.
Thanks, Jeanette. For more of our daily coverage, be sure to head over to Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps Times.com and DefenseNews.com for the best reporting in the business. And to make sure you get all of our top stories in your email every weekday, subscribe to our Early Bird Brief. And don't forget to hit all the right follow buttons on our Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube channels. And when we come back, a look at a new effort to help those at suicide risk. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. The Department of Defense and Department of Veterans Affairs have long sought solutions to the devastating suicide problem. Jesse Karangu updates us on a new effort to use technology to identify those at risk.
A recent study from the Costs of War Project put the spotlight on an alarming milestone in the problem of veteran suicide. According to the report, 4 times as many veterans and service members have now died by suicide than have been killed in combat. While the Pentagon and Veterans Administration have long been looking for ways to reduce suicide rates, the issue continues to persist. For more on the study and the military's problem with suicide rates, we talked to Colonel Michael Hudson, who has worked closely with the Marine Corps in developing strategies to prevent suicide.
I think we need to change the way we are approaching it. And what I mean by that is this. There are people make assumptions and we build plans and we deploy those, right? But we have to be agile enough in our thinking to go, what's not working? So if you look at the veteran data since 2005, as that report talked about, there's been a steady increase in veteran suicide. You look at the DoD stuff and they're talking about in the last 5 years, there's been a steady increase. And so we have to challenge our assumptions. And the assumption that we're seeking to challenge is, why is it the veteran has to ask for help? Why is it the active duty service member needs to raise their hand and say, I need help? When they do, they get great support. There's all kinds of capability behind that ask. But what the data tells us is they're just not raising their hand. So we have to move this conversation left. And that's kind of the passion I have, is using technology in a way that it's not some big brother model. It's not a huge data scraping evolution. It's how do you identify people who are struggling? We're not saying they're suicidal. We're not saying they're a risk. We're simply saying within a population, how do you see? So I'm a vice president of government solutions at a Vienna-based company called ClearForce. We're just outside of the Washington, D.C. area, formed in 2015. And what it focuses on is using data. We're a software company, but we use data, privacy, and compliance to help organizations pick up on struggling employees. We try to pick up on those science and evidence-based risk indicators and have an organization do an outreach or a mitigation effort before it grows into a larger problem. Mental health, what you're seeing, a really good effort, and I should highlight, is what the VA is doing with their concept of ReachVet. It's a relatively new program, but it's actually showing some really good promise. And what ReachVet does broadly is it uses artificial intelligence around clinical data, around medical data. And so if you're engaging with the VA in a clinical setting, they then use that data, they use questionnaires, surveillance, and then they stratify a risk population within there. So what ReachVet does is it uses data tied to artificial intelligence, machine learning, mapped to what we know about suicide in a clinical sense, and identify high-risk patients, and then they do an informed outreach. We think that's a really good set. What we want to do is get outside of that model and say, listen, we need to do that same level of active approach using technology and data to move left, right? How do we do that? That's where our technology and what we're doing today, I think, is super interesting, is using the social determinants as triggers. These are things like financial pressure, substance abuse, military sexual trauma on the outside, even on the inside, connectiveness. The CDC, and I would point you to their 2017 study by the CDC, did a really good job of identifying 7 critical areas that you want to be aware of. And they talk through those, and that's the financial pressures, that's the substance abuse, connectiveness, relationship, legal issues. These are all things that can be discovered outside of the work environment that today organizations tend to be blind to. We think by being able to use new technology to set triggers in that space, to do it with a high level of privacy protection with the goal of empowerment, we think that's going to change the narrative in the conversation. We're going to push resources to individuals by waiting for them to pull them.
If you were part of the leadership of the Pentagon or the VA, what kind of changes do you think would need to be done to make sure their efforts are more successful in stopping this benchmark from happening?
Yeah, I think first you have to compliment them for their efforts, right? So even though the numbers are going up, I can tell you from friends who are still working within the Department of Defense and within the VA, this is an all hands on deck effort. So let's be clear. The fact that the numbers are going up isn't because those organizations aren't fully switched on trying to make a difference. I want to be clear there. They're pushing all in to make a difference here. I think what needs to happen is when you look at something, you go, hey, we have this plan, we have this model, we're executing, but it doesn't seem to be getting where we want to go. I think at that point, you need to go back and challenge some of your assumptions. So if I was coaching up either team, I would say, so we recognize suicide's a hard problem. We recognize there's no silver bullet or silver lining to this. We have to find a way to understand this broadly. So I think we need to go back and challenge some of our assumptions. We need to go back and look at what we can do different. I think I would seek and they're doing that to some degree, look for more agile and different ways to approach the problem. If it is an all hands on deck, let's bring the outside community, let's bring science and technology, let's expand it outside of just a mental health conversation, which is important. Let's look at the other side of that optic and see what we can do in that. And this is the key. And think about your own experience, Jesse, is organizations, if we can pick up on someone who is struggling sooner, we have a better outcome. We're not going to project that you're going to do a bad thing or that you're going to end your life by suicide, but we can pick up on is you're under a great deal of pressure and stress. What happens in the military, that gets amplified because military members, and they carry that over as veterans, they tend to not want to ask for help. We tend to train them to solve the riddle, right? Keep moving forward. So sometimes in doing that, they withhold or keep inside. So what we need as leaders, we need is ability to kind of sense when someone is pushing beyond a normal set or a trigger set of lines. This is where we reach out. This is a resiliency conversation. This is a mental health conversation. This is a physical fitness conversation. They all weave together, but really the key in all of this is organizational awareness. We have to augment that, and that's what we think technology and science can help with.
The report suggests the military needs to promote, quote, help-seeking attitudes in a positive way. It also suggests an increase in medical screenings for issues such as PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, depression, and suicide ideation. For Defense News Weekly, I'm Jesse Karangu.
And that's all we have time for this week. Please visit us on militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more coverage. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.